Okay. It's my pleasure now to introduce our speaker this morning, who is one of my Unity buddies from long ago and still is. Reverend Eileen Patra is the award-winning author of The Mystical Ark, A Vessel of Blessings, and its recently released experiential guide, A Mystical Approach to Spiritual Living. Eileen has served as the teen ministry consultant for the Unity Great Lakes region. She was the founding member of Unity of the Lakes in northern Michigan, senior minister at Unity of Livonia, Michigan, and co-minister of the Spiritual Life Center in Troy, Michigan. Reverend Patra has also served on Unity's education ministry team and as a Unity Urban Ministerial School board member, which you were ordained from the urban school, right? In 2014, she received the Ruth M. Mosley Award for Outstanding Achievement in Ministry while serving at Unity of Livonia. And Eileen and I met many years ago at Unity Church of Royal Oak. We were both involved in youth ministry. I also did consulting for the region, and she followed me after I released that. So I feel like the region had a really good representation because we were both serious longtime students, and we had a great love for children and still do. And we just have a love to serve. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy what she has to share with us today. I know I will, because that's kind of where I've been. So let's welcome Reverend Eileen Patra.
Thank you, Carol, and you're absolutely right. The region was really fortunate to have that, and we were fortunate to have that experience as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah, and fortunate to know each other.
Absolutely.
And I'll be honest with you, it just I could not have picked better music or a better daily word to lead into what I want to share with all of you today. So thank you, Carol. Thank you, Spirit. And thank you, all of you, for being here with me today to share in this experience and this energy and the message that I have for you today. I'm going to invite you just for a moment to just take a breath. Just feel that energy, whether you're here in this room or you're watching us online, feel that energy around you. Feels good in here, doesn't it? Feels great. I feel wonderful being in that. And, you know, a pause like that can be extremely powerful. I'm talking today about our sacred pause. And I couldn't believe the daily word was resting into the presence of God, exactly what I want to talk about. But the idea of a pause in any way can be extremely powerful in our lives. Whether we pause the button on the TV remote to go to the kitchen or wherever else it is that we may need to go in that moment, or whether we take that sacred pause that's often accessed through that breath, easily accessed through the breath, from the doingness of life, or the emotional impact of an experience that we might have in our lives. Just take a pause. A sacred pause is powerful because it changes everything. It changes the energy, it changes our point of view, gives us an opportunity to have a higher perspective and recenter ourselves as we move through whatever is occurring in our lives. We elevate our vibration, our thoughts, our words, and our actions. And by doing so, we elevate that experience. And a pause is a powerful tool in so many ways, and it's powerful in our communication as well. And you know, one of the most popular ways to communicate these days is text messages, right? Text messages, guess what? They don't have commas. No, I mean, I do when I text, but you know, I'm just sort of a little OCD about grammar, but most people don't. And it changes what's said, right? It can change what the person sending the text meant and a huge difference in what the person receiving the text gets. And we do this a lot in our communication, not just with commas, but commas make a big difference in the written word. For instance, you've probably heard or seen the t-shirts that say, "Let's eat, comma, grandma." Without the comma, it's "Let's eat grandma." Or "I'm sorry, comma, I love you." Without the comma, it's "I'm sorry, I love you." Huge difference, right? It makes a huge difference, and we could possibly be causing great problems in our relationships without the pause, without taking that pause to go somewhere higher. And guess what? The Hebrew scriptures are completely devoid of commas and periods. The Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, is what we usually refer to it as. And so the pauses were left up entirely up to the orator, the oral communication. Now you can imagine what that might do, because an oral communication would have the influence of whoever's speaking, or however the one speaking is feeling in this moment. Or they're speaking very rapidly and they forget about the pause, So it can make a very big difference, right? You can imagine that. So the pauses were related orally. Now imagine for a moment that, think about the game that perhaps you played when you were young called the telephone game, right? Okay, so if I come over here and I whisper something in Sheila's ear, and she whispers it to Susie. These are my cousins, so I know their names. But she whispers the same thing to Sue, and then to Lisa, and then around the room to each of you, and to Richard and Carol, and it comes back to me. Is it the same as the one that I sent out? It's very unlikely. I might be eating grandma, right? Or causing a really big rift in a relationship. So it's really important to take those pauses. And so I want to look today a little bit at some scripture. And it comes from Exodus. We call it the Law of Moses, or more familiarly, the 10 Commandments. Right. And so if we look at those and we think about where we might place a comma, instead of "I, comma, am the Lord your God," which is kind of authoritative, or even as one sentence, "I am the Lord your God," it's very authoritative and indicates some hierarchy and separation. But what if we put the pause after the word "am"? I am the Lord your God. Consider for a moment how we came up with the name of God through Moses. He was at the mountaintop. Now the mountaintop's like up on the rooftop, right? Up on the rooftop where everything is calm, and up in that higher consciousness, Moses understood the name of God to be "I am that I am." Well, that's not a hierarchy. That's not a God out here. That's a God that is everywhere. That's a God that's present in each of you, and present in me, and present in all the space around us, in the gap, so to speak. Right? And so if we take that whole same sentence as "I am that I am, is Lord, is God." What a difference. Think about that for a moment. What kind of difference does that make? Now, for me, what I understand is it makes a difference in that they become what we call the 10 Commandments are shifted from a command from a jealous, judgmental God in the sky to the blessings that come to us when we remember who and what we are, when we remember that we are one with all that is. And so those commands become the, do, shall not do's become shall not experience, right? You cannot take the name of the Lord, the God in vain, because God is omnipresent everywhere. God is omniscient. God is omnipotent. God hears everything, our thoughts, our prayers, right? Our thoughts, our prayers. It's impossible to take the name of God in vain. On the same token, we shall not steal, for we shall not know lack when we are centered in the presence of God. We shall not lie, for we shall experience only truth when we are aware of our presence and oneness in God. And that brings us to remember the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath. Now, I don't know about you, but when I grew up, remember the Sabbath meant I was going to Mass on Sunday mornings. I was brought up Catholic. In fact, I was going to Mass every single morning because I went to a Catholic school, right? And heaven forbid, don't forget, you got to be there on Christmas and Easter and all of those special days, right? And those are wonderful things. Those are wonderful things. But it's remember, the word Sabbath simply means rest. Remember the rest. Remember to rest. It is even more expanded than remembering to go to church or to rest from labor and toil in doing this. It's remember the rest of you. What's the rest of you? You're so much more than this physical body. You're so much more than that. You are all of this and all of the same elements of God. So a comma could make a huge difference. Now, there's nothing wrong with the literal interpretation of the Ten Commandments. I don't dispute that. They're wonderful rules for living together in community. And no doubt, that Moses went up that mountain again and came down with that message. It's not surprising that he might interpret it in a way to be kind of crowd control, right? Because he had a lot to do with these people. And when he first came down, he couldn't use them at all. They were shattered because he faced this gigantic energy that had begun to believe in idols and other types of gods. Well, thou shalt have no false gods before you, in this idea that we are one with God, that we are the I am that I am, means that there is nothing bigger than the presence of God, not just within you, but within all things that can lord over you. There is nothing that, except the things that we make into a false God in our lives, because we do that sometimes, but we can take a rest from that. I'm a big fan of a show called The Big Bang Theory. Anybody here?
Oh, I love it.
Right. I loved that show. I watched it from the first episode all the way through the last one, and now I watch Young Sheldon. But for those of you who have not seen it, Sheldon Cooper, the primary character, is a theoretical physicist. He's got an IQ of, beyond Einstein. And he's also a little inept socially, but he's really quite funny, and his beliefs in God are pretty, not non-existent. But he's asked in one of the episodes if he goes to church, and he said, well, I don't really have a problem with the idea of a supreme being or a deity, but I just am totally baffled by one that takes attendance. I'm baffled by that. And so really, it's not about, remember the Sabbath is not about attendance. God is giving us encouragement to remember the rest of who we are, remember all of that. That sacred pause is an incredible blessing in our lives. It's a great benefit to us, we know, physically and emotionally, to take a pause from whatever's going on. It lifts us into a higher point of view and grounds us in that allness from which we come. And that allows us to respond to conflict from that higher place, from up on the rooftop, right? And so imagine the worst problem in the world that you can think of? What are some of the problems we face today in the world?
Starvation.
Starvation?
Sudan right now is, they're all starving.
Yeah, right. That's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Disease. War. Scary stuff going on in the world, right? So if we stay down here and we stay in that limited point of view, we have very little power over those things that appear bigger than us, am I right? But if we take that pause and we remember that power of God within us, the power of God within every single being, whether it's visible at the moment or not. And we remember the presence of God that is between us, that is the very existence of life. Well, that's a whole different story. Possibilities. We stop resisting. And we know what we resist persists, right? We stop resisting. And when we do that, we can hear the presence of God. We can hear a message. We can hear a way, a possibility that we might not have heard before. In the sacred pause, we stop resisting and we start living and being. These ideas are really the underlying premise of the book, my novel that I wrote, The Mystical Ark, The Vessel of Blessings. The idea was that all of that piece of scripture are infinite blessings that unfold a little bit at a time into our lives. And so I illustrated that. It's a long story of how that came to be, but I won't go into that. It's illustrated by these 4 characters who are on an expedition. It's a little bit like Indiana Jones meets Deepak Chopra. Is how I like to describe it. So there's 4 explorers, and they discover the Ark of the Covenant. And they try to open it, and eventually it opens on its own, and it turns out that there are no stone tablets in the Ark. The Ark is a portal to another realm. And in that higher realm, these 4 participants experience incredible wisdom and understanding. They get it. They get it all. They come out, they can actually hear each other thinking. And they're just living in this incredible place of wholeness. And then they come down the mountain. And they come down the mountain to the aftermath of a very violent scene that has happened there. And they are suddenly forced to bring all of that into the world and into their now experience. And so life can be like that at times, right? Life can be like that. We might start our day with our meditation, yoga, tai chi, however we like to start the day. The sun is shining. That's always a good one for me. It brings me right up there. The sun is shining and things are going really well. And then the phone rings or the text message without any commas comes in, or whatever it is, or the news seeps in through social media or television or the newspaper or Time or Week or whatever. And all that wonderfulness can start to dissipate. We can find ourselves quickly into that limited way of thinking in separation, thinking in duality. And so I have a little key for you. It's a little acronym that I like to use. And it is using the word rest. R meaning remember. Just remember moments of feeling that wholeness. Remember the moments that you have spent on the rooftop. The E is elevate. Elevate your awareness into that feeling, into that place of the higher self. And S is for silence. Just silence the inner chatter. Silence that. And just rest in the I am of you. Rest in the allness of you. And the T is for thanksgiving. Thanksgiving because gratitude is a much higher energy than anger or fear. So it lifts us naturally higher. While I was going through a very challenging time in my life, I set aside my regular journal, the one where I write about what happened that day and the one where I sometimes rejoice and often complain. I set that one aside and I began to do what I had told other people to do. I began to write at the end of the day 3 things I was grateful for every night. It helped me sleep. It helped me elevate, helped me see a different point of view. And I'm still doing it today. 3 things that I am grateful for helps me to be lifted higher. So I'm going to invite you that when you hear those words, remember the Sabbath. Remember that it is so much more than a command. It is so much more than a meditation practice. Remember the Sabbath is to remember the rest of you, where you came from, who you are, and what you bring to this world. It encourages you to rest into the wholeness at any moment of any day, whatever you may be facing. Remember the rest of you, your sacred self, and allow the essence of life to flow through you, blessing you and through you, the world. And let it be. God bless.
Yeah,